See waiting room? Okay, we have 19 participants. All right, welcome everyone. Thanks for joining us today. We have today with us the Mayor of Bloomington, Mayor John Hamilton, and Alex Crowley, the Director of the Department of Economic and Sustainable Development, here today together with their partners in the Economic Stabilization and Recovery Working Group that was convened in the last week of March in response to the mayor's, in response to the COVID-19 pandemic to cope with the financial impacts locally of the pandemic. Today we're going to be talking about funding and other resources that have been made available by this working group and are being opened to applicants today. To begin our discussion today, we're going to have some remarks from the mayor. After that, we will have explanation of some of the how-to from Alex. And we invite you to pose your questions after the presentation. Members of the media, that is, please do mute yourself while the conference is going on so that we can have optimal audio. And thank you so much for joining in. And I'll send it over to the mayor now at this point.
Thanks very much. I'll be brief. I just want to make a couple points. And before I do that, I do want to again thank our healthcare system, all the people who are working so hard in the health arena to deal with this health pandemic. Wonderful heroes locally, most of them unsung. But I do want to thank all the folks who are working so hard on responding to this health crisis. A couple points I just want to make is first, in the midst of this health crisis, I felt now 18 days ago, we stood up a group to help think about, well, we are going to get through this health crisis. It has huge economic implications, both immediately, currently, as well as some challenges as we move forward. So the Economic Stabilization and Recovery Group, which stood up only 18 days ago, it was tasked with thinking about how do we try to minimize the economic pain and cost of this health pandemic, and also how do we try to plan for and work now toward an economic recovery that can move us forward as much as we can. While the health focus is front of mind right now, this group has been stood up, and I appreciate that they step forward to help us think about that. The second point I'll make is that group. I just want to thank this amazing group of people who 18 days ago didn't know each other. No, they knew each other. Most of them knew each other, but 18 days ago came together and in an extraordinary commitment of time and energy and creativity and dedication. They've produced what you're going to hear about today, but also they're going to continue to work to help think about how, on that economic lane, how do we do the best we can for our community. They've worked very hard, and I know they'll be introduced. I won't name each of them yet, but each of you, how much I appreciate what you've done. They've also engaged the community in much wider ways with dozens, scores, hundreds of reach out to get the support and ideas that we need. Thank the City Council, thank the Bloomington Urban Enterprise Association who've helped bring forth some funding. And this is the start. As I've said, we're in a marathon that starts with a sprint. This has been a sprint. I want to thank you all on the Economic Stabilization Recovery Working Group, and I'm going to hand it over to you to give the big announcement and news and handle questions. But just on behalf of the whole community, thank you so much for what you're doing.
Thank you, Mayor. So I'll pick it up from here with some brief remarks to start us off, and then and then we'll open it up for questions. Let me start by reiterating my thanks to the entire Economic Stabilization Recovery Working Group team, and I will list them by name. Pat East is Executive Director of Dimension Mill, Inc. Jane Cooper-Smith is a City of Bloomington Assistant Director for Small Business Development. Brian Payne is the Executive Director for CDFI Friendly Bloomington. Jennifer Pearl is the President of the Bloomington Economic Development Corporation. Aaron Predmore is the president and CEO of the Greater Bloomington Chamber of Commerce. Sean Starwitz is the City of Bloomington's Assistant Director for the Arts. And we have two other members that have been very involved that I wanted to mention. Jeff McKim from the county, and wanted to really appreciate, he's been great as part of that team. And then also council member Sue Scambolari, who has been involved in helping us interface, particularly with the council. So that is the core of the group, but there are a ton of people who've been involved, helped put the work together throughout the community, too many to name, but I can tell you this has been a pretty strong, robust, coordinated effort that's involved a lot of people, and I wanted to echo the mayor's appreciation to everybody for all the hard work that's gone into this. So what we have been working on, and we've published to the public several drafts of an economic stabilization recovery document. The first one was a little bit of a wide-ranging set of ideas, and then we honed it into what was published last week, or I should say, I guess earlier this week, which was the version 3 of that document, and we'll probably keep working on it, so you can expect additional versions of it in the future. And it, as the mayor mentioned, it talks about not only in version 3, not only the rapid response that we are talking about today and we'll focus on today, but also lays out some plans for mid-range recovery and long-range revitalization of the economy, and then starts to think about how those efforts can take form and stand Bloomington up, and really the region for that matter, much stronger than we were even going in. So there are some future planning efforts that will be required to do that, but what we'll focus on today really is the Rapid Response Fund, which is a fund that combines two different sources. One is the food and beverage tax. $2 million were approved from that by the City Council in an ordinance on Tuesday night. And then another $500,000, $500,000 of support from the Bloomington Urban Enterprise Association. So that's $2.5 million that we can put to work in a variety of different ways, primarily through the Rapid Response Fund loan process. And that has just opened as of 2 o'clock today. And perhaps the best way to address that is to anticipate a couple of questions that the public and others might have, and to answer them. But then we can delve into specifics about it in the Q&A. So one obvious question is what kinds of businesses are eligible for that? And it's a little complicated, but basically what we're trying to focus on is to provide bridge funding to as many possible businesses as we can in Bloomington, all the while encouraging them to be pursuing significant funding that's becoming available from the federal government and the state government. So we are attempting to create a bridge to that funding to the extent that they can get that, but we also recognize that not everybody will. So we have to balance that out. The businesses that we're trying to target, the food and beverage allocation has some limitations. We're trying to cast the net wide, but broadly speaking, it's businesses and organizations that are involved in the general tourism, as broadly defined as possible, industry in Bloomington. And then the Bloomington Urban Enterprise Association funds can be used to support businesses that may fall outside of that. And so the combination of both hopefully can allow us to consider as wide-ranging an area of small businesses as possible. There are going to be some limitations naturally, but I would, in the absence of knowing specifically on a business-by-business basis who's in and who's out, I would encourage people to apply, err on the side of applying if you think that you need the help, and also if you believe that that this can be useful to you, and we will in the review process help to sort all of that out. So In order to be eligible for the loans, a business needs to have a physical address in the city limits, or be a nonprofit that resides in or serves Bloomington. The business or organization has to have at least one full-time employee and no more than 250 full-time employees, or be a sole proprietor business. The potential borrower must demonstrate materially or negative impact as a result of COVID-19 in revenue, or the ability to maintain employees and payroll because of COVID-19. So we're looking very closely only to help those businesses that need the help, and that process will target those. A business had to have been open before February 29th of this year, and then, as I'd mentioned, applicants need to be making very strong and good faith attempts to go and pursue other funding sources, because we do not have the local resources to maintain and support the entire local economy through all of this. We're really dependent on external funding sources for that, like the CARES Act. So really, we're trying to encourage as many people as possible to go pursue those. And we have functions that exist to help that. So there are non-funding elements that are in play as well. Thanks to the folks at the Mill, there's a navigator function, which essentially is meant to help people connect with resources. And I see Pat East here. He was instrumental in standing that up. You can find it at askthemill.org, and your questions can be routed to people who can help you with that. So again, we really want people to go and pursue as many supportive funding sources as possible. And I think there's a lot of that out there right now. So the loans that we are proposing in this document will have specific terms, and I'll just lay out those terms at a high level, and then we can get into details if you like. Basically, what we have is a low interest rate loan at 2% interest. The loan period is 36 months, amortized loan. We are putting in the ability for a business who applies and receives a loan to defer payments for up to 6 months. So if they get a loan, they can defer payments for up to 6 months. And then if a borrower repays the loan within 12 months, then that loan repayment will be net of any interest. So it would be interest-free if you repay it within 12 months. The reason we're doing that is because we are hoping to bring monies back in again, and we are trying to maximize the period of repayment to the 12-month period in the hopes that within that period, someone is able to secure other funding that can help to repay the loan and stabilize the business. Obviously, there's a lot of uncertainty about how long all of this will last, and we're trying to balance out some of that uncertainty with some structure to help people potentially restabilize given the crisis. The final point about loan terms is that a small subset of them may end up being forgivable. Those would be for certain nonprofits, and we'll have to make judgments on that based on a variety of different details. But just so you know that is a potential option for some of the nonprofits. And then I think probably the key final thing I'll say is there's a significant community-wide commitment to helping in this moment of crisis. Speed to market was a driving force behind the activities that we were undertaking. I know it's been a little while since the COVID-19 hit. We were scrambling as fast as we could to get this pulled together. And so with the launch of the application portal today, which can be found at Bloomington, the City of Bloomington website, bloomington.in.gov/business. And then you can click there and you will be brought into the application platform that will then start the process that creates the evaluation. A couple of points about the application process in wrapping up. Number one, I wanted to tip my hat to CDFI Friendly Bloomington. Brian Payne, who's the executive director, who, with the help of folks over the Community Foundation and a lot of creativity, as well as help with, from Aaron Predmore at the Chamber and others in the working group, turned the platform around in breakneck speed. And it was, so CDFI Friendly Bloomington, which is a relatively recent addition to the economic development organization set in Bloomington, did some really, really heavy lifting already. And there's a potential for CDFI Friendly Bloomington to become involved potentially in some future funding, which we're in discussions with them on. And that funding could be significant. So it could add to the pool that's already been gathered for this initial activity. So I wanted to particularly recognize that activity from them, but also just reiterate, as I did earlier, just how impressive the group and the individuals in the working group have been making all of this happen. So I think I will pause there. I'm sure I've forgotten something, but I turn it over.
Alex, thank you so much. I realized that there were a couple of moments there where your audio was cutting in and out. So members of the press, if you have questions about things that were not entirely clear during that presentation, please do go ahead and present those questions. I have suggested that you present the questions in the chat box, and then we can go in order. Whether something was not clear or whether you'd like to ask an entirely new question, please do go ahead and do so. I'd like to ask members of the press to present your questions first. If any of the other members of the working group would like to supplement what Alex presented, I invite you to do so as well. All right, Emily, would you, Emily Ernsberger from the Herald Times, would you go ahead and ask your question?
Yes, sorry, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, great. What is the turnaround time for businesses who are applying for loans? When they send in an application and it is received, how long will they have to wait to hear back if they have been approved or not?
It's a good question, and I don't have a specific answer to it. What I can say is that we will be working very aggressively to make that as turnaround time as short as possible. So, first of all, I would encourage everybody to apply as soon as they can so that they're in the system. Some of that speed will be determined by the volume of applications that come through. My sense of the early activity is that someone who's applying right now should potentially be able to have money in hand by towards the end of next week. So that again, we're trying to figure out the exact details of timing, but it's going to be as quick as we possibly could make it.
Thank you.
Thanks. Our next press inquiry comes from Dave Askins from the B Square Beacon. Dave, would you like to ask your question?
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Is there a final version of the application form that's available somewhere, Alex? The portal basically makes you register and create an account and then start filling out the application, and you don't get all the questions all in one go. You have to answer pre-qualification questions. So if I want to just see what does the application look like, is it the same application that was in version 3 of the draft that was circulated, or have there been revisions since then?
Thanks, Dave. There have been revisions, and the short answer is at this very second there is not a extracted copy of the application as it exists on the platform, but we can do that after this call. And Yael, if that's appropriate, we can perhaps post it in the same location as the application link would be, if someone would want to download and review the application document in PDF, for example, before getting into the system.
Sure, we'll do that.
And Dave will follow up with you to let you know when that's been done.
Okay, I would like to ask for members of the press to ask your questions, but in the meantime, we have questions from members of the public. Someone who is with the Trojan Horse, Kristen Shelley, asks, how do you suggest we create a 6-month revenue projection when we do not know, number one, when the dine-in ban will end, number two, what the customer base will be like with many students not returning to campus, and number three, generally reduced tourist travel. Could someone address that, please?
Yeah, I mean, I totally agree. It's very hard to look into the future and understand exactly what's going to happen. I think what we would ask is, do your best. I mean, I know that you're probably right now, you've seen some significant revenue drops. And, it's hard to answer that without knowing what plans you may or may not have relative to, to trying to expand that revenue in the near term. What I would ask is if you can take your best shot at that based on what you know about your own business operations in the next 6 months. Certainly with the reduction of all of IU's activities in the summer, there's not going to be the kind of summer, crowds that there would be in a typical year. And so just, I guess my advice is try to do the best you can. We recognize that that's a challenge, and we'll, look at that accordingly.
Okay, another question from, and Kristen Shelley says, thanks. Another question from, I presume, member of the public, Pat East says, I could help Kristen with projections through the Mill Navigation Center. Pat, would you like to tell us more about this resource that's been created?
Yeah, thanks, Yael. So part of the problems a lot of founders and business owners and entrepreneurs are facing right now is that there's so much help out there. It's almost too much help. There's, while you're trying to work on your business, or in this case, save your business, there's almost not enough time to kind of filter through all the other information that's out there. So the purpose behind the Navigator Center is you can quite literally email, call, or chat in what your specific situation is. So with the Trojan Horse, you can say, hey, how do we figure out 6-month revenue projections when we don't know these different variables? And somebody will quite literally walk you through either resources where you can get that information, or in my specific situation, I'd be happy to kind of walk through at least how I might approach using those projections. So the idea is really to kind of give the resources to the business owner, the entrepreneur, the small business owner on a silver platter, because they're dealing with so much stuff right now. All of this information is available, but it's so hard to find sometimes. It's so hard to figure out really what applies to you. So the idea is just to make it as quick and easy and painless for these folks to get started. So askthemill.org. You can call in, you can email in, or you can chat in. And there's 10 or 15 different volunteers from the Mill or Entrepreneur in Residence, the BDC, the Chamber, IU Ventures. There's lots of different folks on there that have business experience and are willing to help out and direct you to the right resources.
Thanks a lot. And that's just one of the multiple support mechanisms that's been created through this working group. I don't know if we wanted to explain some of those mechanisms in greater detail. Possibly sure. Jen Pearl from the BEDC might want to address that.
Hi. So it's good to see all of you today. For those of you that are looking for additional resources, the press release that was posted on the City of Bloomington's website that was sent out for today's meeting has a full list with the links that you can see. Some additional resources that are out there include Monroe County COVID-19.org, hosted by the Chamber, where I know Aaron Predmore could speak more to that. The Indiana Small Business Development Center provides coaching, and they are a statewide network. So no matter where you are located in the state, you can find a location. Ivy Tech hosts that center here locally, for those of you that know Steve Bryant. There are also a few other resources. One, for those looking to support businesses, the farmers market is also available online now. There's a link for that, as well as the Open for Business function that was set up by the Mill and 39 Degrees North for tracking which restaurants are open right now and how you can patronize those. For any of those items that I just mentioned, if anyone would like to jump in with further details, I know that's available as well.
Great, yeah, that's openforbloomington.com. That's the restaurant map. Thanks, Jen. We have another question from Dave Askins of B Square Beacon. If you'd like to go ahead and ask that, Dave.
Yeah, okay, can you hear me?
Mm-hmm.
So, Alex, the version 3 of the draft, as well as the earlier versions, all made explicit mention of prioritizing minority-owned businesses. Are you making any specific efforts to reach out specifically and only to target minority-owned businesses to make sure that they're aware of these resources, or essentially are they being lumped in with everyone else? I mean, my concern is that at the end of the day, we'll look at the kinds of businesses we've helped. We'll notice that no minority-owned businesses were helped, and we'll say, well, I guess they just didn't apply.
You want to jump in?
Erin, please do.
If I can. Dave, this is Erin Predmore with the Chamber, and our Black Business Owners Affinity Group, actually, I sent them notice as well about this application. So that's something that we have, one of our groups internal to the Chamber. And I imagine that the rest of, I mean, that promotion and things like that, making sure that those individuals need to know. I know that's something that we've done. I just did it just a little bit ago. And then there will be other listings as well through, I mean, like our web awards winners and things like that, like other women-owned businesses in the community. And then the city itself has a women and minority-owned business enterprise list that could easily be accessed and make sure that they're targeted, make sure they have the information. Those will all be duplicative though. I mean, those lists are similar, but it's a good way to make sure everybody has that information.
Okay, thanks.
So the Department of Community and Family Resources has a lot of outreach mechanisms, and so we've reached out to them. We're going to be working with them to ensure that this gets out to the widest array of minority-owned businesses. Also, in addition, the application itself has a field that is specifically drawing out that data point, and then the matrix, which is the scoring matrix, has that in it as well as a sort of weighting factor. So to your point, Dave, there are a couple of things. One is making sure people know about it, and then number two is once they apply, we want to make sure that prioritization can be given to businesses that tend to be underserved.
Yeah, thanks. Aaron, could you say the name of the internal working group again at the Greater Bloomington Chamber that you said you had just recently or just a few minutes ago done something?
Yeah, so the Black Business Owners Affinity Group in the Chamber, and it's a list of close to, I would have to count, 45 or 50 people in the community, so that are all leading businesses that are, they're Black-owned businesses, so.
I think an important point to address here would be just to clarify the scope of businesses and nonprofits and cultural groups that qualify for that are eligible for this funding. If any of you in the working group would address that question.
So in terms of industry types, in terms of size, so industry types, again, I was saying earlier on, it's a little complicated, but we are trying to cast that net as wide as possible. So where the food and beverage tax be focused primarily on businesses that are broadly defined within the umbrella of tourism related, but that's pretty broad, and we're trying to make that as encompassing as possible. Think of that as really any business that sort of generally is contributing to the tourism quality of life attraction umbrella that Bloomington benefits from. And then, for businesses that fall outside of that, there's also the money from the Bloomington Urban Enterprise Association, which we went after and stood up and got their approval to stand up as part of this, because we understood that there would be businesses that would fall outside of that first grouping. We are going to bias, businesses that are locally owned. So while it doesn't necessarily disqualify a franchise owner of a business, we do recognize in those cases that there is corporate umbrella support that they can benefit from that an independent owner would not necessarily be able to benefit from. Certainly we do have a cap of 250 employees. And the logic behind that was we're aligning with the definition by the SBA, Small Business Administration, on size there. We do expect that, Bloomington just doesn't have a lot of 250, employee businesses. So we do expect that just from a volume perspective, many of the applications would be much smaller businesses than that. But there is a range of funding up to $50,000 to try to cover needs that are happening at the larger scale if necessary. And I think that's how I would sort of qualify that, Yael, if that answers your question.
In terms of the size of the loan, Alex, we did get a question from a member of the public. I don't know if this is a business owner. I assume it is. Who asks, regarding the amount of money that we apply for, do we apply for an amount we feel we need, or do you tell us how much we're allowed to borrow after our application is submitted?
So the application asks for self-reporting of what the business owner feels they need. That may or may not be possible. We have somewhat limited funding, so one of the functions of the review process will be to try to figure out, what is possible against the requested need, and to try to balance that out against the, somewhat limited funds that are available. So there's no guarantee that what you ask for is what you'll get. What we hope people will do is recognize that they, as an individual business, are part of a large group of businesses that will be applying that are having similar pain right now. And to, ideally try to limit the requests that they are making to the minimum that they need to get through this, and be able to come out the other side. And because every dollar that is over that minimum threshold will literally be a dollar that will not be able to be put against someone else's business. So, we just hope that people look at this as a community effort, recognizing some limitations, and right size the request accordingly.
I hope that answers that question. Again, we are meeting today to talk about the rapid response funds that are available to small businesses and nonprofits and cultural organizations in our area through the city's Economic Stabilization and Recovery Work Group. What a mouthful. Members of the press who'd like to pose questions, we'd love to hear from you. We'll probably wind up definitely by 5 o'clock. I would add in the interim that maybe a little clarification would help with regard to the cultural groups that we're hoping to assist, that nonprofit cultural groups specifically. What do we have in mind here?
Yeah, so we have a parallel working group the mayor set up, which is focused on social services a lot of nonprofits fall under that. There'll be funding requested and pursued for support of that sector of nonprofits. What we recognized was that there was a risk potentially of a set of nonprofits that don't fall under that, but that are also not for-profit businesses, things like theater companies and a lot of the cultural organizations that exist in Bloomington that make Bloomington so great. And they are particularly taking it on the chin. And, you know, theater companies have gone dark. I mean, there's, you know, it's great. I mean, everybody is feeling this pain, but in particular, that group, we wanted to make sure they were not left out. So we have brought them under this umbrella. So it's not just for-profit businesses. It includes nonprofits in that cultural space, which contribute to the tourism appeal of Bloomington. And so there are, you know, a couple of considerations particular to that group. I mentioned earlier that there's a possibility of some loan forgiveness to that group. Now that will probably be the exception, not the rule, but you know, that's a little different than what would be available for for-profit businesses. And then the other thing, you know, relative to that group is that the Bloomington Urban Enterprise Association funding has embedded in it some monies for operating grants, which is a little bit different than the loan program here. So, you know, there's going to be some amount of potential funding associated with that. So they are a kind of unique need. They have unique challenges. They're feeling the same, you know, financial difficulties that everybody is, but because of their kind of unique status, that there's a slight difference on how what's available to them in this rapid response overall program.
All right, thank you. I'm going to pose this question from Tammy Clark before I get back to Dave Askins from the B Square Beacon. She says she's on a call with May Cristobal, who owns El Ranchero, Viva Mas, and a few other restaurants. She says his accountant shared with him that he can only apply for one of the programs for local business relief. He applied for the payroll forgiveness today. May's question, can he still apply for the Rapid Response Fund and others available? Sounds like we're talking about a couple of different funding sources here, maybe?
Yeah, I mean, I think broadly speaking, this is not meant to preempt someone's ability to go and obtain federal CARES Act dollars. I think that's sort of the short answer. So by applying to this, one is not disqualified from doing that. In fact, as I'd said earlier, we are strongly encouraging people to apply for that as part of their process that would involve applying for this. So I'm not sure exactly what the accountant was referring to in that case, but from our perspective, from this program's perspective, this is not in any way meant to supplant or to divert from activities that they would pursue for CARE dollars, you know, the federal CARES Act phase 3 monies, which include a number of different programs.
Great. And then let's, oh, okay, so there's a response from Steve Bryant who says that's the PPP program from the Small Business Administration being deployed through local lenders. It is okay to participate in both programs. It shouldn't affect the PPP, but supplement it. And that's essentially what you said. It's not a mutually exclusive kind of deal. Yeah. All right, and so Dave, you want to pose your question again?
Sure, can you hear me?
Yes.
So early on, apparently there was some substantial discussion on the group about the possibility of helping individuals directly, employees of businesses directly, perhaps instead of or in addition to businesses themselves. And it sounds like fairly early on a decision was made not to go down that path. It's a point that Councilmember Matt Flaherty has raised at just about every public meeting to sort of champion the idea that that is a community sentiment. But at this point, obviously, that's not going to happen. But I was hoping that you could lay out in maybe greater detail what the argument was that won the day. So what we've heard is that, well, you know, this is not enough money to carry the entire economy. We would burn through the amount that's available in a short while if we tried to cover payroll. But if you do the math, the last 3 weeks, there have been about 4,000 new unemployment claims filed in Monroe County. That corresponds roughly to the number of food service workers and food preparation workers that the Brookings Institute analysis provides. So $5 million if we went for the entire amount of food and beverage funds that are unexpended that's available to the city. 5 million divided by 4,000, that's about $1,250. In addition to the federal aid that we could put in the hands of 4,000 employees, which I think if you did that, you could clearly make the argument we helped 4,000 people to the tune of over $1,000 a piece. So why not do that instead of this elaborate loan program?
Well, Dave, I think you're perhaps, let me clarify, I think, how you characterized the program. You know, there are a number of mechanisms inside of this program that are designed to actually have this money support individuals. We are you know, encouraging people in the application process to detail their plans for employees, to you know, to use this money for support of short-term payroll needs, and to really, you know, a business in the end is a bunch of people. And so taking the loan amounts and applying them to the extent possible to maintain payrolls in the in the period between today and when the PPP program that Steve Bryant had answered before kicks in and in a much more robust way is able to protect those employees. So what we're trying to do is really get this money to, you know, to people to keep employees on as much as they can, cover some of their other costs in the short term, and then also to save the businesses so that in the mid-range and the longer term, the economy can reemploy people that have lost their jobs, and we can get back to where we were before and even better. So I would challenge your characterization of we are just funneling money to businesses and individuals are not benefiting from this. Individuals are the point of this, and they are very much, you know, the target of what we're trying to do. I would say that the use of money to cut a check to an individual is much better done by a federal program than a limited local one for the short-term, mid-term, long-term objectives that we have here.
If I could just follow up, I don't think that that's the way I characterized it, Alex, but maybe I could clarify. I'm trying to get at the distinction between direct benefit to businesses as opposed to their employees, as opposed to direct benefit to employees, which would have an indirect benefit to businesses. So, I mean, I well understand that the loan program is meant to try to make sure that businesses are focused on their people. But that's an indirect benefit. That benefits them because the business survives. So you could take a different approach, which is to say, let's worry about benefiting employees. And if our employee base is whole, and if they're thriving, and if they've survived and they've stuck around here locally, then the businesses will benefit from that because they'll have that pool to tap into once they get back open. So it's really a choice between who do you benefit directly and who gets the indirect benefit. So that's what I'm trying to draw out. What was the argument for this approach as opposed to saying let's benefit employees first and let the business owners enjoy the indirect benefit?
Well, this is where I would sort of challenge you a little bit, Dave, because we are not saying, hey, let's just give the money to the business, keep the business around, and then indirectly the people will will sort of generally benefit from that. What we're saying to the business is, tell us how the money that we are going to loan you, how you are going to apply it for payroll and other costs, but payroll being one of them. And there are very specific questions in the application having to do with employees. So it is where I'm challenging the characterization is simply that it's not an either or. We are doing what we're trying to do by funneling monies through a business entity, the applicant, to the employee base of that, to the extent that we can do that, and biasing for that, so that in fact the employee is getting a direct benefit, even if the application is not the individual applying as an individual, but it is an entity applying on behalf of the individuals that are part of that entity. And so that's I mean, we can probably go back and forth 12 times, but I would basically say that we are doing what we can, recognizing council's raising this issue. We were aware of it and interested in it from the beginning. So there was not a decision not to benefit individuals. It's a way to get there that we feel is most manageable and most effective, given some of the limitations of what we have from a funding and programmatic perspective.
Thanks, Alex. And thank you, Dave, for the question. Thanks for everyone who has attended this conference. And that's just about all the time we have. Make sure that you do go to bloomington.in.gov/business to see that application and the additional materials that we'll post there, and to reach out to Alex with additional questions. We'll be posting a video tutorial for users, to prospective applicants at the website, and I invite you to check that out too. Thanks all, and from the City of Bloomington, good evening.